Greetings, my dear ones. Let's talk about the canon, the official list of books included in one's Bible. When I teach intro to the whole Christian Bible or just to the Old Testament, we'll often have a quarter of a class period, a half a class period talking about the canon. It feels like the right thing to do, when you teach a college class on the Bible. But a question that always comes up that I feel so ill-prepared to answer, at least two questions actually. One that I felt partly prepared to answer and I want to talk more about, which is the question, what difference does the canon actually make for interpretation? Like these disputed books, the so-called Apocrypha with a capital A, this category of books that are in Catholic Bibles and Orthodox Bibles, and then in some Orthodox Bibles even have books beyond that, and then some other Orthodox groups even have books beyond the other Orthodox groups, but those books versus the Protestant canon, which has fewer books in it, what difference do those extra books or those apocryphal books, or however one wants to consider them, what difference does that make? I've always had a partial answer to that, and I think I have a little bit of a better one that I want to talk about. But the other question that is always so fascinating is people want to say, what would it ever take to open up the canon? Like, can we get another book in the Bible? Or can we take a book out of the Bible? I mean, the last real kind of canon moment for Christianity was, in fact, in the Reformation. And Luther, as many of you know, didn't exactly take a knife and cut out these so-called apocryphal books or deuterocanonical books out of Bibles. And in most Bibles, they were already in a separate section anyway. It's not like the Bible just went like Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Tobit, Deuteronomy. I mean, they were in a section. And Luther famously said that he thought that they were profitable for reading and for study. They just weren't to be considered on the same level. The trick with Luther, though, of course, was not only did he not cut them out of Bibles, and in fact, in the 1611 original King James Bible, I believe, I'm not mistaken to say, it included the apocryphal books bound within it. Not only did he not cut them out, but he also called into question other books that clearly did remain in the canon, even for Protestants. He had some harsh things to say about the book of James. I don't think he loved the book of Esther, at least in his so-called table talk, or what Luther was purported to have said casually, talking with others. Thought the book of Esther was too Jewish or portrayed Jews too positively. Luther was famously anti-Semitic. The book of Revelation came under question, other books as well. But anyway, I point that out to say that was the last moment when there seemed to be a serious institutional level reckoning with canon. And of course, the first clear list from a Christian leader was Athanasius's 9th festal letter in the year 367 AD. It's not that the canon was proclaimed or first acknowledged in the year 367 AD. It's just the earliest evidence we have from a major church leader type figure listing out what we came to recognize as something like the canon, okay? The earliest Christian, I think, to even propose a canon was, of course, Marcion. The same Marcion who proposed a different canon. I mean, the canon he proposed was not one that was accepted by the church, but his movement persisted for decades, indeed for centuries beyond even his own lifetime. So the church really had to deal with the Marcionite movement. Marcion proposed that what we should have in the Bible is a kind of abridged Gospel of Luke, I guess, called the Gospel of Marcion. But I think people agree that it's basically based on Luke. And then also a kind of curated set of some Pauline writings and no Old Testament. And that's it, so that's a pretty radical canon suggestion. So the church definitely had to deal with that, had to make a decision about that. And then there were councils and other kinds of things, a Reformation, a Counter-Reformation, Council of Trent, etc., etc., etc. So, to that question, how are we going to get a book in? It's hard to imagine, the kind of institutional gravitas of any kind of Protestant group today being able to get its act together to make a judgment about canon. It doesn't seem to be forthcoming. And no doubt there are smaller Christian groups and splinter groups and all kinds of groups that have made proposals. I'll mention LDS. Can't comment here on the status of LDS vis-a-vis other Christians or if they're Christian, but to say, of course, the Book of Mormon and other writings there would also be a canon issue in a sense for Christians to think about. But this other question, I was compiling a resource for a class I'm teaching right now on hermeneutics, on biblical interpretation, and I'll make this resource totally publicly available. Link down below, lots of sources in it, and it's a living document, probably has errors in it and things, but that's why it's a living document. I can update it, so if you've got any corrections or suggestions, let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to think about it. But I really am thinking about this question of interpretation, like where do we start? And it's so hard to think about where to start in a way. It's like, We could start with, a very serious problem, which I've made another video about, I'll link down below, namely, do we even need to interpret at all? There just should be no interpretation. We should just know or beam out the truth or something like that. I think that's an interesting one to deal with. But really, I started thinking about the materiality of interpretation, the very physical form in which we receive the Bible. And that includes not only the packaging and the advertising and the men's study Bible and the teen girls study Bible and all that. Timothy Beale's book, The Rise and Fall of the Bible, The Unexpected History of an Accidental Book, I think it's called, linked down below, is a great book for thinking about that materiality of the Bible and how that's a really fascinating topic, and I've really enjoyed Timothy Beale's work on that front. But also the contents of the Bible, the canon. Which books are we even reading? I mean, how are we supposed to talk about interpretation if we're not even reading the same books? Which words are we reading? The problem of textual criticism. Which manuscript traditions? We'll have to talk about that separately. The huge topic. And then also, of course, huge topic, translation. So I'm grouping these kinds of concerns together under the rubric of materiality. What is this physical text that we receive? And certainly canon is a major part of that. But as I was creating this document for my own, just to get my own head on straight, and also for my students, I started to think to myself, okay, what difference does canon actually even make? Are there, and just to take one angle on the question, I realize we could compare, for instance, the Jewish Hebrew Bible compared to the Protestant Old Testament. Same books, but you have them in a different order. So the Christian Protestant canon ends with Malachi, which really propels us forward into the New Testament with the great and terrible day of the Lord and the coming Elijah figure. So we're looking forward to a person, you could say. Whereas in the Jewish canon, ending with 2 Chronicles, we're looking forward to a temple and a return to the temple. So those are two different endings to the book, and I think that makes a difference. We could talk about that, but we won't. We could talk about all kinds of other things, but I was looking particularly at, and I have in the document I link below that I'm creating, I have just a simple canon chart comparing Jewish canon, Protestant canon, and Roman Catholic and Orthodox canon. And of course, it's these books: Wisdom of Solomon, Sirach or Ben Sirach, 1st, 2nd Maccabees, Judith, Tobit, Esther, the longer version, Daniel, the longer version, Greek Daniel, Greek Esther, and then 1st and 2nd Esdras, Prayer of Manasseh, Psalm 151, 3rd and 4th Maccabees, which some Orthodox groups and other groups also include. I'm also at least vaguely aware that there are some very particular Christian groups, I think in Egypt, certain kinds of Coptic Christianity perhaps, that even consider 1st Enoch to be a canonical book, which no other Christian groups really do. So I started thinking to myself, what if I get this dreaded other question? Not just can we add books to the question to the canon, but what difference do these books even make? Okay, so what if Luther said they were profitable for study and so on? Like, who cares? Okay, let's study them. Like, is there any big doctrine in here? I did a little bit of a deeper dive than I had in the past, which reaffirmed for me at least one issue, but I came up with a couple of other ones too, so I'm curious to hear. Any Catholics or Orthodox out there, do you think I'm missing not just anything that could count in any way? I mean, I realize we could get into the weeds on this. I'm talking big level, salvific, heaven and hell kind of issues. That's what I went hunting for. The thing that had already been in my consciousness at least was the passage in 2nd Maccabees. This is a story telling about the Jewish recapture and cleansing of the temple in the 2nd century BCE. It's the Hanukkah story essentially. And there's a passage in 2nd Maccabees 12 where someone, the noble Judas, I think this is Judas Maccabeus, the word Maccabee in Hebrew means hammer. Judas the hammer, it's hammer time, is doing some things. The noble Judas in this passage is exhorting people to keep themselves from sin. Sounds like a good thing. For they had seen with their own eyes what had happened as the result of the sin of those who had fallen. So there's a battle and people have fallen in battle. He, Judas, also took up a collection, man by man, to the amount of 2,000 drachmas of silver and sent it to Jerusalem to provide for a sin offering. In doing this, he acted very well and honorably, taking account of the resurrection. For if he were not expecting that those who had fallen would rise again, it would have been superfluous and foolish to pray for the dead. But if he was looking to the splendid reward that is laid up for those who fall asleep in godliness, it was a holy and pious thought. Therefore, he made atonement for the dead so that they might be delivered from their sin. So that seems to make a difference. There's nothing like that in the Protestant Bible. There's nothing for Protestants that would suggest that I'm a Protestant, with a lot of holy envy, as we might say, for the Catholic tradition, a lot of respect for it. But there's nothing in the Protestant scripture that would suggest we should pray for the dead, make atonement for the dead, take up a collection for the dead. And obviously for Catholics here, you have a kind of scriptural support for an idea like purgatory. I think it's pretty simple. You know, the idea of helping people achieve the resurrection better, faster, in some expedited way. So that's one. And by the way, these passages I'm reading from are all from the NRSV, and they are all in the resource that I'm linking below if you want to check it out. Here are two other ones, though, that I hadn't really known about that I dove into. Both of them are in the book of Tobit, a book I haven't read in full for a while. A lot going on in Tobit. It's a charming little story. Here's a passage in Tobit chapter 4. Act according to what you have, my son. If you have much, is kind of wisdom advice being given here. If you have much, give alms from it. If you have a little, give alms in accordance with what you have. Do not be afraid, my son, to give alms. You will be laying up good treasure for yourself against a day of need. For almsgiving delivers from death and keeps you from going into the darkness. Indeed, almsgiving, for all who practice it, is an excellent offering in the presence of the Most High. I think in Protestant Bibles we can find an emphasis on giving and of caring for vulnerable people, for sure. But this very strong emphasis here on almsgiving, connected with this idea of delivers you from death and keeps you from going into darkness, would support, I think, a view of salvation based on a certain kind of works, we might say, or charitable acts, as opposed to a classic Protestant notion of sola fide, faith alone. Of course, you have that dichotomy already spelled out in Romans and James, and this is why Luther had the quarrel with James, because James says, what, you think it's faith alone? No, show me your faith, I'll show you my works, and my works will, prove my faith, and that sort of thing. But I thought that makes a difference. That moves the dial, okay, if that's in your Bible or not. And then also from Tobit chapter 12. So now when you and Sarah prayed, it was I, speaking in the first person here, this is an angel, Raphael. It was I, the angel, who brought the record of your prayers before the glory of the Lord, and likewise, whenever you would bury the dead. And that time when you did not hesitate to get up and leave your dinner to go and lay out that corpse, I was sent to test you. And at the same time, God sent me to heal you and Sarah, your daughter-in-law. I am Raphael, one of the 7 angels who stand ready and enter before the glory of the Lord. So what do you have here but a kind of detailed angelology, a detailed description of an angel acting as an intercessor, which could also provide a kind of model, by extension, for saints who have died, saintly figures who can give intercession for the living after their death to God. This is, of course, a feature of Catholic spirituality, but not typically for Protestants. So I thought at least by providing those passages, I could give a little bit of an explanation for, okay, who cares about the Apocrypha? Catholics have it, others don't. What difference does it really make? Those 3 passages are ones that I'm now coming to see as ones where, okay, that makes a difference, that matters, but haven't even really dug into whether 1st and 2nd Esdras, Prayer of Manasseh, Psalm 151, 3rd and 4th Maccabees. For Orthodox above and beyond Catholics, what difference that might make. That's a study that will have to await another day. I will say that Psalm 151, a purported Psalm of David, I know that one definitely doesn't make a difference for doctrine or theology. It's a super boring psalm, and I'm not admitting that into my canon. I'll tell you that right now. All right, thanks for listening.